During the summer of 1882, in a house on the banks of Lake Zurich, a 15-year-old boy sat at the piano, eagerly working away at the Clementi sonatina assigned by his teacher. Suddenly, an intrusive thought seized his imagination. The boy tried to rein in his wandering mind, but he couldn't escape the thought of the outdoors, the sunbeams, the freedom. This was real music, not the arid 18th century sonatinas of Clementi. So Clementi's music gradually melted away through sinking harmonies with no regard to the old rules. This is how the 65-year-old French composer Charles Koechlin depicted his early dreams of composition. The piece comes from a 1933 piano suite he wrote about his childhood summer at Lake Zurich. It's also the continuation of a joke first made a decade and a half earlier by Koechlin's friend Eric Satie, whose bureaucratic sonatina of 1917 lampooned the same Clementi movement from 1797. In typical Satie fashion, the music describes a day in the life of a common bureaucrat, complete with absurd commentary. Koechlin outdid his colleague in the adventurousness of his own parody, but his piece is more than just a joke. It's Koechlin's definition of his own distinct compositional voice. It's as if he were saying, this is how Clementi did it, but here's how I would treat the same material. 50 years after that idyllic summer at the lake house, Koechlin was writing piano music that sounded like nothing else. It was full of luminous polytonal chords made up of stacked fifths and ninths that defied traditional analysis, widely spaced harmonies that seemed to wander without explanation, and dense polyphonic writing that demanded the frequent use of 3 staves to make the score legible. On top of all this, most of Koechlin's pieces were extremely slow and extraordinarily quiet. The consistently wide spacing of his chords made them difficult for pianists with smaller hands to play, while even those with larger hands must frequently use broken and arpeggiated chords. Part of the challenge of interpreting Koechlin's piano scores is deciding when and how to redistribute the hands into roll or break chords as necessary, with the help of near constant connective pedaling. Koechlin wrote a large number of piano works ranging from beginner to expert difficulty, yet few of the most challenging ones are outwardly virtuosic. He only wrote what he absolutely needed to express and nothing more. Regardless of complexity, most of Koechlin's works demand intense concentration by both the player and listener. Let your mind wander for even a few seconds, and you can easily miss a subtle modulation that pivots the piece in an entirely new direction. Koechlin rarely repeated ideas verbatim, and almost none of his works resemble the familiar forms or structures commonly found in other music. Thus, it can be extremely difficult to understand where you are in a Koechlin piece without concentrated and often repeated listening. But those who do develop an ear for Koechlin's music will be rewarded, as attested by his esteemed colleagues. Milhaud wrote that there is a quality of line and expression in Koechlin's music which gives the feeling that it is here to stay. Another composer, Satie, said that many of Koechlin's works are not amongst those that one can listen to simply to be filled with their pleasure or their charm. They demand to be followed step by step and concentrated on without distraction. Then one is assured of finding in them that higher pleasure which only exceptional works can offer, on a level above ordinary awareness. While Koechlin composed prolifically across all the major genres, his piano music was exceptional. In 1947, the English critic Wilfrid Mellers said that familiarity has gradually convinced me that Koechlin's 1916 suite, Landscapes and Seascapes, are among the few outstanding piano works of our time.
Saint-Saëns me disait, lorsque j'eus l'honneur de lui être présenté, vous voulez être compositeur, c'est un métier de martyr. Il faut bien avouer qu'on a des ennuis, des difficultés, et qu'on est souvent incompris, surtout par les critiques musicaux. Pourtant, je ne changerais pas ma vie contre une autre, et si c'était à refaire, je la referais ainsi. Cette existence est celle du loup, libre dans la forêt, tandis que les chiens captifs ont la vie facile, mais la liberté est plus précieuse que tout.
Koechlin's journey from a 15-year-old playing Clementi sonatinas to a respected figure of modern French music almost began too late. In 1890, at 23, he was already too old to enter the conservatoire normally, but he was admitted that year as an auditor. From Professor Gédalge, Koechlin learned about fugues and counterpoint as living, contemporary musical forms. History classes stimulated his lifelong interest in modal music and ancient chant. Massenet advised him to write down ideas quickly and without judgment, and only to revise them upon further reflection. In 1896, he began studying with his idol, Fauré, whose limpid, Sicilian-like piano pieces in 6/8 meter would be a lasting influence on the young Koechlin. Koechlin's younger classmates in Fauré's studio included Ravel and Roger Ducasse, to whom he taught fugue and counterpoint when the professor was away on business. Later, in 1909, when Ravel wanted to form a new and more independent organization to rival the conservative National Music Society, he first enlisted the help of Koechlin. Even though he had Fauré's personal support, Koechlin was to forever remain an outsider to the musical establishment. His association with the independent composers of the younger generation kept him from ever landing a steady job at the Conservatoire. Instead, he only sporadically served as an independent examiner while teaching at rival institutions like the Schola Cantorum and various regional conservatories. He became an internationally respected authority on modern French music, and even made 4 lecture tours across the US. But even as Koechlin's reputation grew, the acceptance of his music did not. The kind of music he wrote tended to be more appealing to his musical colleagues with specialized tastes than it was to the broader public. But Koechlin did not want to be known as an ivory tower composer. To help introduce his art to the masses, he published a series of more accessible piano sonatinas featuring more familiar tunes that were treated in special ways. Take, for instance, Koechlin's setting of this popular French song. Debussy had featured the same tune in the toccata-like third movement of Esteemed, Gardens in the Rain, where it emerges above murmuring triplets and beneath dazzling arpeggios. By contrast, Koechlin's non-virtuosic treatment of the melody supports it with lush, unadorned chords. Duets form as the music ventures through remote key areas, condensing into a couple of final echoes and dissolving upwards in the final bar. Even in these popular pieces, Koechlin indulged in more daring experiments. This Sicilian movement begins like an innocuous cabaret song, tuneful and charming. But already by the end of the first page, Koechlin introduces a third stave to make room for a rich 4 to 5 part texture. After a modulation into A major, Koechlin's harmonic choices grow bolder and more spontaneous, almost whimsical in their complete freedom. Having done all he could to demonstrate the potential of this tune in a few short pages, Koechlin ended the piece as innocently as it began, leaving us to marvel at the inexplicable journey we just took. This sonatina movement introduces two important aspects of Koechlin's style. In the absence of quick tempos, loud dynamics, and virtuosic flourishes, he often used free counterpoint and nearly constant modulation as his primary expressive devices. A good example is the second piece from his 12 landscapes and seascapes, evocative of a calm morning. A brief prelude introduces the melodic contour that will be developed throughout the piece. The organ-like theme has a pedal bass underneath 3 or more interweaving voices. After a page of mostly static harmony, this measure cycles through 4 unexpected chord changes. By contrast, the next bar suddenly feels several times slower because it returns back to a static harmony. As this moment arrives, an echo of the opening prelude in the middle voice emerges, as if recentering itself around the main material. This occurs again on the last page, but underneath a more active texture. Overall, the piece gives the sense of floating upwards until 2 descending bars lead to a final resolution.
la révolution de Koechlin, si révolution il y a, et par opposition peut-être à la révolution schoenbergienne, c'est une révolution tranquille. C'est-à-dire qu'il n'a pas fait table rase de ce qui existait par le passé, et un peu comme Brahms ou un peu comme certains autres compositeurs dont l'aspect novateur apparaît, mais après coup, et lorsqu'on a approfondi leur œuvre, on se rend compte que Koechlin s'est appuyé sur le passé pour prévoir l'avenir.
De toute façon, il avait une très très grande admiration pour Bach. Dans toutes ses lettres, dans toute sa musique, à tous ses élèves, il faisait travailler des chorales de Bach et leur disait « suivez l'exemple de Bach ».
In addition to counterpoint and modulation, Koechlin developed an original harmonic language. Perhaps best described as pantonal, Koechlin's music simultaneously embraced several keys at once. He selected his harmonies not from a strict system, but based on their purely expressive qualities. Often, he began pieces by writing a lone melody, only harmonizing it later on so that its character was not determined by a preconceived plan.
Everything sprang from melody originally, in the way that Berlioz did the same thing. And he much admired Berlioz's compositional methods. After he'd written the melodic line, he then would harmonize it as a separate stage, usually. Sometimes it could be as much as several years after he'd written the melody. And he would work on many compositions simultaneously. Sometimes he was working on as many as 10.
Like Debussy, Koechlin composed with largely consonant but non-functional harmonies, meaning traditional rules like the dominant seventh always pulls toward the tonic did not necessarily apply. But beyond this, Koechlin's sense of harmony was indescribably unique. His luminous, unanalyzable chords were based on open fourths, fifths, and ninths. By superimposing these chords, he maintained consonance while achieving atmospheric colors distinct from traditional tonal harmony. We find an extensive display of Koechlin's pantonal harmonies in the fourth piece from his 1916 piano suite, The Persian Hours, based on a 1904 travelogue by Pierre Loti. To set the scene for a cool morning in the upper valley of Persia, Koechlin employs a series of chilling harmonies that waft through the air. After this atmospheric prelude, the main idea of the piece appears. It's a plaintive melody with a distinct three-part contour, a waver between two adjacent notes, an upward scale, and a downward crest. Texturally, it might be reminiscent of a faux bourdon, a late medieval method of creating parallel harmony around plain chant. Koechlin presents it first in modal form on the white keys only, and then in a chromatically altered form. The first part of the melody repeats again, this time shrouded in the misty opening harmonies. This pivots into the next section, which is like a short fantasy on a new melody in the upper register, beginning with a rising fifth. This middle section reaches a mezzo forte climax, quite loud by Koechlin's standards, and it also features one of the composer's favorite devices, a series of exposed, widely spaced parallel fifths that emit a luminous glow. The faux bourdon idea appears again on the final page, but now it's transformed. The rising notes trace a whole tone scale, giving them an airy, ethereal quality. The melody unfolds 5 times, each with a different expression and accompaniment. We also hear fragments of the opening waver motif. The last utterance of the full melody is condensed on top of itself in 2 different keys, finally evaporating into the rising Persian sun. Newcomers to Koechlin's music often find that it resists easy understanding. Just when we feel at home with a tonal center, writes Koechlin scholar Robert Orledge, Koechlin will veer off at a tangent for reasons far from obvious, but repeated listening helps us understand his logic and original approach to formal unity. Personally, I find that there is a mysterious quality in Koechlin's music. While studying it, I'll ask myself questions like, why did he write that? Why choose that harmony? Is this a new gesture, or has it been presented before in a different form? After careful study, I'll at least find a partial answer, some kind of internal unity that makes the piece a bit more coherent. But usually, parts of the mystique lingers on. Koechlin described his ultimate goal in music as a search for beauty in whatever form it may take. He insisted that the formal balance and musical logic in his pieces was irrefutable. What confuses academics, he wrote, is that this form and logic vary with each work. He expressly refuted labels like impressionist or eclectic to describe his music, arguing that it should be understood on its own terms, taken for what it is. And so, I believe the key to interpreting Koechlin's music is to look at each piece with fresh eyes and ears. It leaves us open to solving the puzzles of his labyrinthine counterpoint or simply accepting his often inexplicable harmonic excursions.
Ah, je lui avais posé la question, j'avais demandé est-ce que tu avais confiance en toi ou pas, à quel moment as-tu pensé que ta musique était vraiment importante et avait de la valeur? Il m'a dit ça a pris du temps, à peu près vers 40-50 ans, j'ai commencé à comprendre que ma musique avait de la valeur et que peu importe qu'elle soit comprise ou pas, l'important c'était que je la fasse et certainement après on la comprendrait.
Au soir de ma vie, je me rends compte que la réalisation de mes rêves d'artiste, pour incomplète qu'elle soit, m'a donné la satisfaction intime de n'avoir pas perdu mon temps sur la terre.
Koechlin died in 1950 at age 83 after a long, productive, and largely uneventful life. While his music was progressive, he remained stubbornly resistant to modernity. He never installed electricity in his home. He hated the telephone for some reason and refused to use it. He only reluctantly embraced the radio after he saw its educational uses. With little help from Koechlin's unfortunate lack of self-marketing skills, his works entered a period of utter obscurity after his death. But they seem to be emerging from this in the 21st century, with more artists recording his music across all genres, solo, chamber, vocal, and orchestral. There is truly something for everyone in Koechlin's art, but our enjoyment of it is only limited by the time we put into it. Already in 1905, Koechlin saw the writing on the wall for a composer like himself, prophetically remarking that it is the practice of the public not to be in a hurry to comprehend things. But on the other hand, once a composer is classed as worthy of admiration, some 50 or 100 years after his death, then everyone becomes overwhelmed at the start of a concert in which the conductor is to reveal the newly discovered master.